So what's the dynamic now with investor confidence and the worry factor?
With any amount of investment, there's a healthy level of respect and fear that goes into any decision-making process, which allows for you to make a more informed decision and a little bit more ingenuity. I feel like um, with the way the market's going, the brokers and even land or property owners will have to take on a more responsible role in making sure they price out their properties appropriately. Also looking at the types of tenants that they're trying to attract for their site and how to actually gain those tenants at the site and create that longevity for them.
Whenever somebody's looking at purchasing like an investment property, they're going to want to use a vacancy factor of anywhere from 5 to 15%, even if the property's 100% leased. I'm finding that the market's incredibly healthy. Most of my properties that I have on my listings, I'm down to one vacancy, if that. So the retail market as a whole, I find is very strong, and people should feel comfortable in it.
Yeah, what we're seeing is the shopping centers in density with high population as well as high demographics, economics are doing well. It's the other shopping centers where they had big box retailers that are losing tenants, and those landlords are looking at alternatives like entertainment, fitness, even medical to fill those centers. But the best spaces and the best locations are still leasing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But what you said, Richie, brings up a good point. What about, what landlords need to do to attract tenants? So what's
Well,
the
I think
magic?
landlords have got first to understand what the tenant needs and can afford, and rent-wise, expense-wise, and also be flexible. That seems to be, people are coming in looking for short-term leases more now more than ever before. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And landlords have got to work with these tenants to get, especially if it's a startup, to get them going.
Right.
The national, tenants, who were signed 10-year leases, they're not around like they used to be.
And most of them are the mom and pop tenants, or like you're saying, they want to do the short term, and landlords should be flexible with that to help incubate these tenants so they grow roots and stay there for the long haul.
And I think the biggest question is, owners need to ask the question, what is retail, right? And if you understand the voice of the consumer and try to answer that question, I think that's the easiest way to fill up your space. By supplying what they're asking for is the easiest thing to do. In most cases, even if you look at like what an anchor tenant is, in the sense that they might consume 45 to 70% of the leasable space at a site, they're not always the anchor tenant in the sense of how they're drawing people to their site.
Right.
So now your anchor tenant might be the guy who's actually having 10% of the space, but he accounts for 40% of the consumers that you actually bring to your site. So I think the biggest thing is recognizing, or the change of what the old definition is of one retail and then the old definition of what the anchor tenant is.
Yeah, we're seeing the restaurants becoming more popular, fitness centers going in, and these all are draws to get people to the center, whereas 10 years ago they weren't allowed in the centers. It was
Right.
more soft goods.
Yeah,
It's-
interesting.
Yeah, it's changed.
Tony, you mentioned the voice of the consumer. Speaking to that, online grocery is starting to grow. It's going to continue growing over the next decade, and that's certainly a reflection of how people are shopping. What's the implication then for grocery-anchored centers?
Realistically, I think it's going to be more so about the grocer, not the center itself, right? Before it used to be a grocery anchored center, now it's going to be the grocer who anchors into people, right? So the grocers who figured out how to do online shopping, those guys are going to be okay. It's going to be the guys who don't know how to do that or haven't figured it out. And look, in some cases, they may go out of business. It is what it is. I think the biggest thing is that in those situations where as though that old 75,000 square foot box used to fill up with one tenant, nowadays you're looking at 3 to 4 tenants in those boxes now, which realistically, is that a bad thing? No, because what it's going to do is allow for the owner, instead of to have to try to fill up 75,000 square foot space, to fill up maybe 20,000 now, or even 15,000. And anytime you get to minimize the amount of risk that you're assuming, I think that's a good thing.
And I think as far as with the online sales of grocery, I mean, some of that is whether it's being delivered to your house or they already have everything bagged up. So all you have to do is pull up in front of your grocery store and just get your pickup. But I mean, population's growing. People are always going to need food. So.
And it depends on the size of the grocer. The larger grocers are going to have to go more on e-commerce. The boutique guys, the fresh markets, the Trader Joe's, may not have to make it a priority, but they're going to have to probably offer it at some point.
Thank you all for your time. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.